Better Business Bureau. I want to thank you all for joining us today as we release our most recent international investigative study. This particular study looks into the problem of fake check schemes and how they are used to bait customers into some very sophisticated crimes. The study is titled "Don't Cash That Check." All of you will be provided unembargoed copies, I believe, in your media packets. The study was conducted by our international investigator, Steve Baker. Steve Baker is the former director of the Federal Trade Commission Midwest. He is employed by 5 Better Business Bureaus: the Better Business Bureau in Chicago, BBB Dallas, BBB San Francisco, and St. Louis are our partners in this initiative. So we've been talking about the problem of fake checks at the Better Business Bureau, it seems to me, for like over a decade. These are the types of checks that we have dropped off at the Better Business Bureau on a very regular basis. All these checks appear to be authentic. They can range in amounts from $6,000 to $3,000 to $2,000. But historically, these checks were connected to a letter that was received in the mail by usually an older American, a senior citizen, telling them that they're eligible or are a finalist for a sweepstakes prize. So they would be then told that they had won a large prize, and these checks were designed to cover their costs, to get the courier to be able to deliver the check, cover processing fees, etc. So the issue, the problem with fake checks has been around for a long time. What has occurred, though, is an epidemic explosion in this program, and these fake checks are now targeting a much younger audience, as you'll hear a little bit later from one of our victims. So now the criminals that have been sending these fake checks, flooding these fake checks into America for years, are now using social media to target potential victims. So a college-age student may see an ad on Facebook, or it could be on a job site offering them an opportunity to work, for example, as a secret shopper, maybe have their car wrapped by, I think we have one victim who believed that they were going to work for PepsiCo. They were sent a check for $3,800. They were told that this was going to be used to cover the cost to wrap their vehicle in a PepsiCo advertisement, and then all they would need to do is just drive around advertising for the company, and they would be paid like $300, $400, $500 a month. So these individuals that take these employment opportunities or respond to them then deposit these fake checks that are sent to them, usually maybe by overnight mail. They believe that the check has come from their employer. They're told to deposit the check and then wire a lesser amount. So in the example of the victim in Oakland that received the check for $3,800, they're to keep $500 for their assignment, send $2,300 or $3,300 to the company that's going to handle the graphics and the wrapping of the vehicle. So they then deposit the check and then wire transfer the $2,300 or $3,300 that they believe is to the company that's going to handle the wrapping of their vehicle. Obviously, that never happens. They learn from the bank that the check bounced, and the money that they wired to the people that they thought were all legitimate is money that was their own to begin with. So this is a very prolific scheme. It is epidemic proportion. U.S. Postal reported that in 2017, they intercepted $62 billion worth of these fake checks that were flooding into America. So $62 billion that they intercepted. We have no idea what the real amount was that actually got to real or potential victims. The losses to financial institutions are pretty astonishing, somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, $789 million in 2016 in losses to financial institutions related to these fake checks, and that was up somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% over the previous year. So the purpose of our study is to shed light on the fact that this crime is now targeting a much younger demographic that are very, very comfortable with social media. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram all the time, and it would not be uncommon for a college-age student to be on Instagram, to be on Facebook, and have a pop-up show up with a job opportunity for them to be a secret shopper, to be, any myriad of things. They respond to those ads, and then they receive very sophisticated communications. There's really no reason for them to suspect that they're falling into a trap. Everything seems to be on the up and up. They don't really learn that they have fallen into that trap until they're notified by a bank at some later date that the check that they deposited was no good. So don't cash that check is the theme of our study. And I think even the deeper theme is don't use any of that money until you're absolutely certain that that money is yours. So we have with us today as guests, we have Jeff Cantor, Chief Financial Officer from Certified Transmission, Don Gonzalez, Vice President of Central Federal Credit Union, and our friend Maggie here, who's going to talk about what it was like to be the victim of one of these crimes. So Jeff's going to give us a little perspective about how it's been hitting Certified. So Jeff, you want to join us?
Sure. So recently we had a $5,000 check come into our bank account, and the bank actually called, their fraud department called, and that's the check, or that's the second check, but the first one was $5,000. Came across, the fraud department called me, had me look at the check. Well, that's not.
I think there's several of them.
That's not the check we're going to talk about. But the $5,000 check wasn't our address, wasn't our logo. It was signed by Richard Nixon. So I immediately told the bank, no, you need to kick that back to the bank that originally took it. I think it was used on a Saturday. I'm assuming that it was a new account that they opened it with, and seeing if the funds were ever going to be funded into their account at that other bank. The second check was the next day, and what we've done, we're looking at all our checks that are clearing our bank accounts now. Physically just looking at them, and we put some other measures in too. And I caught that one for the $500, called the bank, did the same rigmarole, filled out affidavits that it was fraud, and they kicked it back. As of this moment, I don't know if they've caught them. Those were done locally at a local bank here, but I don't know which bank it was. And our bank hasn't got back to us to tell us that they caught them. The other check was a cashier's check that we took for a car. The guy came over the weekend, bought a Mustang from our other company, and it was a cashier's check. It was legitimate. It was a little fraudulent. The cops in Kansas City knew this guy, and they called us on Monday because they were trailing them for some reason, and they seen the car down there, and our in transits were on the car. So they called us. We hadn't even processed the check yet. I ran it through the scanner at the bank, or at our office, and it was legit, everything. They got the car back for us. They caught the guy, but we would have been out money on that one. None of these, with the bank's help, none of them, our business didn't lose any money, but the potential was pretty good. So now we have a few things in place with the help of our bank, and then we're looking at every check that comes through all our bank accounts.
Okay, and we'll do some Q&A after all of our guests have spoken. Thanks, Jeff. Don?
Hey, for Centris Federal Credit Union, on behalf of just Centris and a lot of other financial institutions, this is here in our community. We've got a fraud victim, it's happening with Certified, it's happening with other businesses. And I think probably within the last year and a half is when we started to see this really ramp up. Over the last couple of months, we've seen up to 15 checks a day come through our system that we've caught. That's the ones that we're catching, and we're doing our darndest to do that through training with our staff, asking questions at the teller line. You know, we see a person come in with a check, and it's in an amount that may be of question, but some of these are so small that the check looks legitimate. We can put a traditional hold on it, It might be a check for $500, it might be a check for $1,500 or $2,000 in the case of a fraud victim here. Yeah, we might put a hold on this, but if it looks legitimate and everything else checks out, it then becomes up to the consumer also to be aware. So training our staff today is so important that we're talking to the consumers as well, because there's this thing about doubtful collectability. And if you think about a traditional hold on a check, 3 to 5 days maybe, fraud victim goes in and checks to see if the money has cleared their account, and it has. But in this particular case that we're going to talk about in a little bit, it was actually 7 to 10 days when the bank says it's a fraudulent check. And so that's really, I think, the message here is that if you're going to participate in some of these job opportunities, it's double checking and making sure that if you're going to put that check in your account, then you're also waiting 7, 10 days. And I would caution maybe 12 days to make sure that that has totally cleared the accounts. I think the challenge too for Centris and other financial institutions is that this is a day-to-day process, certainly, but it has ramped up our vigilance, and it's causing us to take more attention away from some of the other things that we're doing. You get somebody that's working those 15 checks a day and having to go through and look at every aspect of that check. If you look here and all the different things that is on the graph, the different components, we're looking to see sequencing with our own cashier's checks. And I didn't realize how widespread this was until I got a call about 6 months ago from Miami, and it was a reporter there who had been doing some investigative reporting on a very similar activity. They had a Centris check. So it was me getting involved with the fraud department. Thank goodness we knew it was fraud and got that stopped. But this isn't impacting just Nebraskans with Nebraska financial institutions. It's impacting people around the country. I think that's probably of great concern. It's reputation, it's people's money, hard-earned dollars that are being stolen daily. And we're doing our darndest to make sure it gets stopped.
Thanks, Tom. Perfect. All right, Meg.
So just kind of tell my story and what happened to me. So around this time last year, I was looking for kind of a seasonal job that I could do to earn a little extra money for Christmas. I've got 3 kids at home. And so I was on Facebook in one of the local buy-sell groups that I'm sure we're all members of, and saw a post for a local mystery shopper. So I responded to the ad, and they let me know, that I would need to go online, fill out an application, and take about 2 weeks for everything to get processed and for me to receive the first assignment. So I went ahead and filled out the application and spent the next couple of weeks doing my research on the company. So these people clearly knew their Google Analytics, because I was 4 pages into my Google search and all I was finding was the credibility of the company, some mergers with some other companies, clients that they had served, as well as an abundance of reviews from previous mystery shoppers who had all had good experiences. So definitely try to do my due diligence there. Once the first assignment came, they let me know that I would receive a check for $2,850, and that I would need to use $2,500 worth of that to buy gift cards to Walmart. Walmart was going to be the place that I was going to be mystery shopping at. I said, why the big check? Why are we doing it this way? And they said, well, this is so that we don't have to keep sending you checks every week. We can have you, have $500 on several gift cards. That should get you through your first several assignments. So when the check came, I looked over the check. I have a banking background. Everything looked perfectly legitimate to me, and I went ahead and deposited that into my bank. My contact at the company said, let me know when you've deposited it, and then let me know when you've purchased the gift cards. And I did advise him at that point that I'd be waiting to make sure that that check cleared my bank before I would be purchasing the gift cards. He said, okay, let me know when it clears the bank. So I think it was 2 or 3 days, probably a traditional hold that they put on my account. After that time, the funds were available in my account, and I took that to mean, okay, it has cleared, the funds are now available. I'm going to go ahead and purchase the gift cards. Once I purchased the gift cards, each with $500 on it, then I was to scratch off the numbers on the back of the gift card and send him pictures of that. And I said, well, why am I doing that? That doesn't make much sense to me. And he said, well, because if I can't track what you're purchasing, I mean, you could be purchasing anything. I have to make sure that this is in line with the assignment and our client. And so, I mean, there was truly an answer for everything I objected to, and I objected to quite a bit. But at the end of the day, it was like, okay, the check is cleared. So we're moving forward with this. And it was about 10 days later, 10 business days, of course, that I discovered that the check had been kicked back and that the check had bounced. And at that point, I checked the balance on all the gift cards that I had purchased to find them, of course, all at zero. So, so that's what happened. Contacted my bank. They were nice enough to give me a 0 interest loan to help pay it back. But of course, as the consumer, right before Christmas, 3 kids, it was devastating for my family.
You might want to stay there, Maggie. Any questions for Maggie?
You said you have a banking background. How did you feel when you realized that all this ended up being a scam?
Yeah, it was like I tried to have a critical mind through all of this. I had done my research. I had waited until what I thought, had the check had cleared. And so I think more than anything, it was frustrating to me to know that the funds could be shown as available in my account, and then 10 days later, it's not. I think we were disappointed that, my thought was, you guys are insured, right? Like I'm not, why is this my responsibility? And so I think that was the hardest part about it.
And I have a quick question. So you talked about how you first saw this opportunity in a local Facebook group
Right.
That you're in. So how did that, in your view, lend credibility to the approach?
Right. So you mentioned that sometimes it's a pop-up or a banner ad. I mean, it wasn't anything like that. It was an actual post in a local, I'm from Lincoln, so it was in a Lincoln buy-sell group. And so, that definitely lend credibility when you feel like it's local and that the people in those groups are, in your community. It seems closer
And they're sharing an opportunity with you.
Correct. Yeah, and these are also groups that you that you're approved to get in, and usually you have to know somebody. So I think that definitely lend credibility to it.
So then, from your perspective, after being through this, how significant of a problem do you think this poses then for a younger audience that's typically quite comfortable with social media, maybe has not been as attentive to a lot of the warnings that we've issued over the years that are targeted for a significantly older demographic? Do you think that? I mean, what do you think that this problem presents to that group of the population?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge problem, and I think that they know their audience, right? They're clearly going after a younger demographic, and we're comfortable doing our research. We want to know, we are on Facebook, but I think that there is that connotation, especially in those local groups, that it feels a little more comfortable, and I think that's something that maybe we need to work on some messaging with. But I think that it really speaks to the level of sophistication and detail with which these crimes are perpetuated, because you can at several points you can have objections and try to do your due diligence, but if they have the right answers and 4 pages into Google, I've got nothing but positive feedback, clearly that's a problem.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
What would you do differently, put in the same position again? What would you look for?
Yeah, I've thought about that a number of times. I think the only thing that I could have done differently would have been to wait the 10 to 12 days that was recommended by Dawn. But and she had mentioned to me before, 10 years ago, this wasn't, as huge of a problem as it is now. And back when I was in the banking industry, it was a traditional hold. It was at 2 to 3 days, and a 10 to 12 day hold was not something that I was even familiar with. And so just a lack of knowledge, I guess, around, just because the funds are available in your account doesn't mean that they're really there. So I guess just waiting that longer amount of time. But I've beat myself up about this a lot and thought, what could I have done differently? And I don't know. I guess with that is, if there's the tiniest gut feeling that you have that something's amiss, listen to it.
After all your research, was this even a thought in your head? I mean, you was in 4 pages, you asked so many questions. These are things a lot of people don't even do when they fall into this kind of thing. I mean, after you've asked all these questions, were you shocked that it was a scam at that point?
Yeah. I was.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think the biggest red flag to me was the numbers on the back of the gift card. But again, when he explained it, like, well, you could use these to go purchase anything, I'm like, well, that's true. I could. He has to be able to track what I'm purchasing and where. Yeah.
When getting this check in the mail was unusual, would that ever happen to you? I mean, like any check, even a legitimate check. I'm just wondering about your familiarity with depositing sort of odd checks like that over in a paycheck or something. That was a new experience for you, getting a check and then.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can.
I mean, when's the last time somebody sent you a check for $2,500?
Right. I mean, the only time that I can think is I actually at one point I sold one of my cars to somebody out of state, and they had somebody pick it up, and they had sent me a check in advance. That would have been the only time that I would have had a check in the mail that I had of that size that I would have deposited into my account.
So not a lot of familiarity with how the system worked after depositing.
I suppose not.
All right, Dawn, fantastic.
Thank you.
So thankfully, Dawn took time to report this crime on BBB Scam Tracker, which is one of the tools that precipitated us thinking that this study was probably necessary. We began to see a big uptick in reports on Scam Tracker of crimes exactly like Dawn was describing.
Babies?
Yes, the Maggie's. And it is, so that is our opportunity then to really dig into the weeds, get in touch with victims, talk to them about this. And most of this, we've learned, the crime is being perpetrated almost exclusively from Nigeria. So unfortunately, it's not like we can go find the criminals that did this to Maggie. They're typically in jurisdictions where we don't have a lot of cooperation, so there really is usually very little that we can do to help victims recover any of their losses. So this is it's a really, really significant problem. And certainly I would think that a year ago at this time, had we done this and Maggie would have seen this on television, it would have been a wonderful opportunity for her to think, wow, that looks like that's what's happening to me. And that's the goal of these studies, is to shed light on these crimes that I think are often, there's not a lot of understanding connected to them. And I think also, and I talked about this just a moment ago, the fact that this crime is targeting such a younger demographic, that younger demographic has not typically been the target of our communications. A lot of times the communications that we're focused on are targeted towards an older demographic that have been typically the victims of crimes that are connected to these fake checks. So any other questions? Any questions for Jeff? Any questions for Dawn?
As checks and those who writing them, and even employers become less and less, these crimes still are pretty prevalent. I mean, we don't see them going away, do we?
I think it's just going to escalate. And the fact that, I mean, a younger demographic would say, well, we don't write checks, we don't really have checks. That's got nothing to do with this crime. This is all about not cashing that check and certainly not using the funds, even if you have deposited it, for the amount of time that's going to provide you as the consumer the protection that you need. But clearly, this is a very complex problem. It's impacting people like Maggie on an individual basis. It's impacting folks like Dawn on a much more collective basis. And I think all of us are in some way sort of wringing our hands about what to do because the problem is escalating. So why is Centris seeing this uptick all of a sudden in these fake checks? Our guess is because the scammers are really targeting a younger audience. With these fake ads or fake opportunities or fake posts that appear to be coming from either friends or people in a local Facebook group. They could be a pop-up on Instagram. They could be seen just about anywhere. And so there's a much larger audience now that we feel are just sort of sitting ducks. There's a lot of young folks that are looking for part-time work. Certainly the opportunity to work from their dorm rooms or work from their homes. These opportunities seem to be extremely attractive. And I think that obviously the takeaway from Maggie's message is that they're highly sophisticated. It isn't like, well, wow, you really should have picked up on that. These are crimes that anybody, and certainly one of our children, any of our friends, families, or neighbors could fall into just as easily as Maggie did.
I'm looking at, all of the different things on the elements of a fake check. Are those things that maybe were on the check that she deposited and they were just so small that you wouldn't notice?
Obscure. There could have been something that was just not quite right, missing. Maybe one of the tracking numbers, an account number, a digit. I didn't see the actual check that Maggie used. Some of them, if you look at them, for more than a minute or two, I think you would begin to pick up nuances that there's a problem with the check. But others that we've seen are remarkably sophisticated. The technology that's available today to criminals that are perpetrating these schemes that wasn't available 10 years ago makes it a lot easier to make these checks more difficult to detect, as Jeff would say. And I can remember when I first heard about the impact that this was having on Certified, is that the management at Certified was saying, they look like very legit. It is super difficult to detect. And particularly if you're not on guard for that, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time investigating the nuances of a check in the way that you should. And as Dawn pointed out, this is a drain on resources. Drain on resources for financial institutions. We're talking about just the experience that Centris is having, but this is so widespread. It's national and international in scope. And I think that unfortunately we are in for a big escalation. I would say that if you consider the fact that $62 billion worth of checks were caught, that gives you a glimpse into the scope of this problem. It would be hard for me to know the numbers out there of people like Maggie that are responding to these offers as we speak, but we think that the rate of victims in 2017 was probably somewhere around 500,000. And it's probably going to grow exponentially until we can get some exposure on what's happening. Anything else? Guys, ladies?
You did ask about the check elements and the check stock being flimsy or suspicious. For what we're seeing, it's so sophisticated. You can go out and purchase regular check stock, and you were talking about printers that are being used, and they're the same printers that we're using in our business for printing those types of things. So it's become more and more easy to fake it. And then for us, we've got a 24-hour time frame to turn it around. So if we are presented with a check, potentially from you as somebody who's looking to cash that, we've got 24 hours to decide whether or not that is a fake or a legitimate check. And there's a possibility that we could reject a legitimate check because it matches very closely to what we're seeing as a fake. It's a big challenge for everybody that is working in a financial services position.
Sure, well, and I am a millennial, and I can't tell you the last time I held a personal check, and whether it was flimsy or suspicious is something that I wouldn't know.
And I guess I will add to that, what I did look for is I looked for the routing number, the account number, and the check number. And it's only because I had a banking background that I looked for those things. Those things were present. And then I also Googled the bank name and address that was on the check. And that was a legitimate institution as well.
So one element that we didn't talk about, and Maggie can maybe respond to this, is that, for example, here's a check that was sent to an individual that was convinced that they had won a large prize. But yet the check is from Allstate. So it's got the Allstate name on it, right? So your check that you received did not have the name of the company that you believed you were being employed by. And did you ask a question about that, or did they respond to that?
Yeah, I asked about the remitter, and they said that it was the company, that they basically subcontract like the accounting part out, and this was the institution and the entity that cuts their checks for them. And that's, at that point, is when I Googled that institution to make sure that that was a legit organization.
And so we're guessing that a couple of the checks that tried to go through certified banks were probably being used in a similar type scheme. So somebody received them, maybe in connection with an employment opportunity, but yet the check that they received has the certified transmission name on it. So I would say that is certainly a significant red flag that people could look for if the check that they're receiving is coming from an entity that doesn't match up with who it is that they believe that they're being employed by. Hey, thanks for coming today. Thank you.